through news, our ongoing rolling coverage of the brutal attacks happening on the Palestinian people, the Israeli aggression that is continuing to take place. I'm one of your hosts, Eugene Perrier, here alongside Rania Khalek. Rania, I mean, it's always good to be back with you. I guess unfortunate that we have to be continuing to be here to update people on this terrible situation, but nevertheless, happy to be here with you.
Happy to be here with you too, Eugene.
And as we start off the hour, just for people to know where things stand, now the conflict in Gaza is continuing here. The Israeli bombardment is moving forward. And, you know, it has now gone into the night hours there in Palestine, Rania. And earlier today, the IDF was putting out statements saying they were planning for an intensive night of bombardment. So not only is the conflict ongoing there in Gaza with the IDF bombing, but they themselves have noted already today that they were going to massively ramp up said bombing this evening on the Gaza Strip. At least 213 Palestinians have been killed in the Gaza Strip, and 61 of those are children, and at least 1,500 people have been wounded. The resistance continues to resist, not to be redundant, in the Gaza Strip. The Israelis have announced 12 dead, 2 children, and roughly 300 wounded. So as we've been stressing really throughout our broadcasts here, the massive level of disproportionality between the number of Palestinians being killed by Israelis and Israelis dead Israelis, certainly on display there. 213 Palestinians, again, are dead. In the West Bank today, where along with the 48 Palestine, there is a general strike that went on today. It was a very significant general strike. The West Bank, almost all commerce was brought to a close, as not just workers, but it seems just about everybody was observing the strike call there inside of the so-called Arab majority towns inside of 48 Palestine, or as many would say, inside of Israel. Also, very significant situation. Israel overall, there were challenges, especially in the transportation sector today, as many Arab workers stayed away in a range of industries. Also, there was a major call for a protest in the West Bank in relationship to the strike. There were big protests all over the West Bank, and that has led to an intensification of clashes there. According to the Palestinian authorities there, the Palestinian health authorities, 70 people were wounded by the Israeli security forces there, a number by gunfire. There were at least 5 critically wounded. There were several Israeli soldiers, I believe 2 were killed, but I think more than that may have been shot. I will try to clarify that, but also 3 Palestinians in an exchange of gunfire. And if I'm not mistaken, that was in the Ramallah area. And this is part of the escalation we've seen of popular resistance, large protests that have been going over the past few days inside of the West Bank, and a stiffening of other elements of resistance also in elements of the West Bank. And of course, there are ongoing, there continues to be, in addition to the strike, the ongoing issues inside of Israel, inside of the so-called Green Line, inside of 48 Palestine, with the issue of Jewish supremacist type forces victimizing Arabs, and Palestinian people continuing to defend themselves and to, in general, resist the really 8th class citizenship that they are subjected to, despite being so-called citizens. So as we start here, Rania, there continues to be significant carnage, of course, in the Gaza Strip. But also, I think it's important to note here, really a unbelievable level of resistance being mounted by the Palestinian people across historic Palestine, from so-called peaceful protests to strikes to the armed resistance, to all civil disobedience, all sorts of things. I should note that there was a large march today at the Damascus Gate that was attacked, a peaceful march. I know some people, it's a loaded phrase to say that, but I think it's worth noting in terms of the response that came forth, a march there at the Damascus gates, which was attacked. You see these water cannons actually just briefly on to the left of the screen displaying this. It's called skunk water. But by skunk, it sort of means, imagine if, you had used the restroom and then taken that water and sprayed it on people. That's what it actually is. And that protest there was broken up East Jerusalem. So that is where things stand. Rania, obviously continues to be tragic, very, very tragic for the Palestinian people in many different ways. Very, very significant aggression. I believe the number of troops in the West Bank is I think doubled from what it normally is. Maybe another way for people to understand the extent of what's happening in 48 Palestine. All border police in the West Bank have been pulled from the West Bank to be sent into these so-called mixed cities, so-called Arab majority towns. I call them that. I mean, they are that, but I think it kind of underplays the element of how they ended up that way. But nevertheless, quite a significant amount of resistance of all types by Palestinian people amidst ongoing aggression by the Israelis.
So I want to add some context because I don't think it can be I think it should continue to be explained as often as possible why this is happening. Because obviously we see Gazans being relentlessly bombed. It's bombed every few years, but people need to understand, and I think people are increasingly understanding that this isn't just a part of an escalation that's happening now. This is a part of an ongoing destruction of Palestine because Israel is a settler colonial state. At its foundation is settler colonialism. It's a country that was founded on top of the land of another people. Israel was founded in 1948 through the premeditated ethnic cleansing of up to 750,000 Palestinians who were forcibly pushed out of their homes and replaced with Jews. That's what happened. Israel is based on an ideology called Zionism, which is Jewish nationalism, which seeks to have a Jewish majority state in this part of the world that is not majority Jewish. And in order to maintain that Jewish majority, in order to maintain that rule, that kind of state, Israel has to continue to carry out extreme acts of violence against the indigenous population because they're not Jewish, they're Palestinian. So that's why there are 2.5 million Palestinians in the West Bank pushed into smaller and smaller enclaves, surrounded by Jewish settlements, who are surrounded by separation walls, who are surrounded by Israeli soldiers, whose own leadership, the Palestinian Authority, has been co-opted by Israel to carry out the occupation on behalf of Israel in some places. That's why they have no rights. That's why another 1.5 million Palestinians who weren't ethnically cleansed in 1948, who actually have Israeli citizenship, are second-class citizens. They are under the rule of a government that on its books has 50 different laws that explicitly discriminate against non-Jews. And they've, for the last week, since this violence exploded in this way, they've been under assault by roaming gangs of settler mobs that are like basically looking for Palestinians to attack, just very racist, right-wing, Jewish supremacist mobs. And then you have Gaza, where 2 million people live, where the vast majority of the population, 80%, is actually the refugees, the descendants of refugees who were kicked out of their homes back in 1948. They're not actually from Gaza. They're from many of the towns and cities that used to be Palestinian. And they are subjected to an air, land, and sea blockade for the past almost 15 years for basically the only reason is to punish them because they're Palestinian. And I want to actually get into that really quickly, Eugene, because,
Sure.
people who've been who know Israel Palestine, who've been active on this issue, already know this. But I love that there's so many people now who are trying to learn and understand more about why this is happening to Palestinians. And again, I mentioned in order to maintain this, Jewish nationalist kind of state, this Zionist state in historic Palestine, the Israelis have to dominate and control and subjugate the indigenous population. And part of that is this siege on Gaza. And so back in the early 2000s, there was actually there's settlers in the West Bank. There was settlers, Jewish settlers in Gaza that Ariel Sharon, the leader back then, a very right-wing leader, actually forcibly removed the Jewish settlers from Gaza. And there was actually a reason for that. And it wasn't to make peace. And I want to read from this, specifically the man who's responsible he's the architect of the siege on Gaza that was put in place. His name is Arnon Sofer. He was a demographer at Haifa University. And I'm just reading from this, piece that basically quotes him in the Jerusalem Post back in 2004 explaining this idea of how to deal with the population of Gaza. And he says, this is from a piece in Counterpunch that lays this out, but this has been written about by lots of people, but this is just the one in front of me. It says, the demographer Arnon Sofer of Haifa University is the architect of the current isolation of Gaza. In 2004, he advised the government of Ariel Sharon to withdraw Israeli forces from within Gaza, seal the territory off from the outside world, and simply shoot anyone who tries to break out. Quote, when 2.5 million people live in a closed-off Gaza, it's going to be a human catastrophe, Sofer told an interviewer in the Jerusalem Post. Quote, those people will become even bigger animals than they are today, with the aid of an insane fundamentalist Islam. The pressure at the border will be awful. It's going to be a terrible war. So if we want to remain alive, we will have to kill and kill and kill all day, every day. He added that, quote, the only thing that concerns me is how to ensure that the boys and men who are going to have to do the killing will be able to return home to their families and be normal human beings. That's a direct quote from Arnon Sofer, the man who is really the sort of architect of the siege strategy on Gaza. And again, I mean, I was reminded of this because people were talking about it online, but also I remember reading this in 2008, 2009, when there was a war in Gaza. I remember reading his words again in 2014. And now I'm reading them again today in 2021 as we see one assault after another on Gaza. So there is an explicit strategy of domination and control that is behind this, of a very, kill and kill and kill. Those are his words. And that's part of this real strategy that we've talked about of mowing the grass in Gaza, of every few years going in and just like mowing the grass, right? Taking it back, de-developing it even further, terrorizing the civilian population. So this is an intentional, indiscriminate attack on an area of the world that is an open air prison. And the reason it's treated this way is because Israel is a settler colonial state trying to subjugate and dominate and ultimately, silence and pacify the indigenous population so they can go about their ongoing land theft and their ongoing colonial project.
I think that is a very important set of historical points that you made there. I had actually not heard that quote. Shoot whoever tries to get out. I mean, wow. The whole thing is chilling, but what a chilling statement.
And Eugene, that is exactly what Israel did back in 2018 when there was those massive protests at the border in Gaza. The Great March, and they shot for a couple months. They still shoot people, but they shot like over 1,000 people. They killed so many people. They shot people in the knees in an effort to intentionally paralyze them. So that strategy exactly has been carried out.
It has, with the complete and total complicity of the United States government, I might add. And that saga, of course, continues, as you see here on our screen, 213 at least killed in Gaza, Palestinians, 61 of them children. President Joe Biden is in Dearborn today for some sort of infrastructure-related piece. Large protests there in Dearborn against his presence, called a war criminal and many things from the stage. But what I think is notable about that is what the press has been reporting about where Biden is at on this. Apparently Biden, who ridiculously is now saying he told Netanyahu that he is urging a ceasefire, not demanding it, just saying, hey, maybe you should do this. But nevertheless, what has been reported that's more interesting to me, Rania, is that apparently he also told Netanyahu that he doesn't believe he can hold back the basically the tide of opposition to the U.S. not doing anything to try to rein Israel in. Yep. And, those are just reports. But to the extent that's true, I would say that's deeply notable if there is a possibility that Biden is feeling significant pressure from the massive worldwide movement that we've seen in solidarity in Palestine, as well as the obvious steadfastness of the Palestinian people. But I think that's notable. We also reported yesterday about the $735 million weapons deal that was approved by the Biden administration for Israel. One of the elements of that was a big chunk of it actually selling them bombs, or really, material around bombing. Some of them are not straight bombs. Some of them are different pieces of material. But nevertheless, that probably is almost certainly going forward. But just the revelation that this was happening yesterday caused a little bit of a ruckus in Congress. Representative Greg Meeks of New York, who is the chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, released what I also would assume to me was a ridiculous statement, saying he's going to write to the Biden administration in the next few days, asking them to pause the shipment because the time to object essentially in Congress to these kind of deals is actually basically over in the way that it works. There were 4 days left yesterday, but it has to be in the committee for 10 days. So it can't really happen. So they're going to beg Biden to this. But it's also, again, notable, I think, about the nature of the opposition, because according to the Washington Post reporting on this issue, Meeks was, well, according to staffers who were familiar with the conversations, Meeks had been trying to sneak this thing in, and that part of his chairmanship, or a significant part of his chairmanship, is that he has tried to obfuscate these weapon sales in order to try to fly under the radar and make sure people do not raise any sort of concern. So if he's now walking that back and telling the media, I didn't know what was happening, who knew what was going on, I'm writing to the Biden administration, even if it's completely and totally cosmetic, it does show a certain level of fear from Greg Meeks that if it becomes known that he was a part of trying to shepherd this thing through, that he himself could potentially pay a political price. Certainly he will, and already has paid a moral price in terms of the reality of this deal. But I think that just emphasizes another important element of this, is that the worldwide outpouring of support, the steadfastness of the Palestinian people, despite the fact that they're up against great odds, is at least shaking the walls and creating a little bit of uncomfort for powerful people.
I think it's really shaking the walls and creating discomfort for people who consider themselves sort of like the Western supremacists, who always thought of Israel as this reflection of like Western democracy in the Middle East. But what they're starting to realize is that, and I think it's a lot of it is because of Palestinians, because of social media, but also because of the work that's been done to push this to the forefront of progressive politics, is that and because of how right-wing just Israel has become and associating itself with sort of the global right wing, whether it's like this sort of Trumpian right wing of the world, right? So what people are starting to recognize, including liberals, is that you have this thoroughly modern state with all the formal liberal institutions that we associate with democracy and progress, like courts, a parliament, whatever, using the newest technology to impose this brutal and this brutal means of subjugation and oppression that we associate with the medieval era. Like they have this medieval siege on Gaza, right? They're like shooting to kill people. They're just, everything they're doing is so backwards in what we associate with just intentional punitive measures against the civilian population. But like, unlike brutal states, because there are other states that do this, right? Like Saudi Arabia has been destroying Yemen, causing a man-made
huge
famine.
protests in Yemen as well for Palestine yesterday.
For Palestine, right. But unlike other brutal states, it's not treated as a pariah, but it's welcomed like into this polite company of the international community. And then, in the so-called rules-based order, despite the fact that it's constantly flouting it. So, it's like even these sort of bastions of like progressive liberalism that have always been, soft Zionists, like, they support the idea of a Jewish state. And, sorry, that means that Palestinians have to be like bulldozed sometimes. Even the bastions of that, like Human Rights Watch, for example, are now being forced to acknowledge that this system has actually always been apartheid and illegitimate. And so because you have all that going on, I think that is really what's changing the narrative a bit, where you even have people like John Oliver, right, on HBO, people like Ali Velshi. We showed a clip of him a few days ago on MSNBC, just calling Israel an apartheid state, where you can have these members of Congress saying Israel's an apartheid state. And, people keep wanting to attribute that to like, oh, it's because they're, the squad, they're progressive. But I actually want to credit the Palestine Solidarity Movement and Palestinians for changing that narrative, because there's been a lot of work done over the past 20 years, really to change that narrative. And I think finally, it's a long time coming and it's still not where it needs to be. But I think that the Palestine Solidarity Movement needs to be given credit for all the work that's been done to push people on this issue.
Absolutely. And before we just turn the page, for those who are just joining, you are watching Breakthrough News' live rolling coverage of the ongoing aggression happening across Palestine. I'm Eugene Puryear, one of your hosts, alongside Rania Khalek. Ongoing aerial assault, and it has been naval and artillery as well in Gaza that's killed at least 213 people, 61 children. There were 70 people wounded. I believe that's just today in the West Bank by Israeli security forces. At least 3 Palestinians I saw were shot dead there. Israel now reporting 12 dead, 2 children and 300 wounded. So that's 213 to 12 there, which gives a sense, again, of the disproportionality of this conflict. But we want to keep moving and keep things rolling on. And we are very, very honored, very happy to be joined here as we continue our coverage by Olivia Cotby-Smith, who is excuse me, my computer is actually trying to randomly restart on me. The negativity of working from home in the context of this. But Olivia Cotby-Smith, who's an organizer with the BDS movement, as well as DSA, joining us from Oregon. Olivia, thank you so much for being with us here on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Well, I'm really happy to have you because I think in the face of, such inaction on the world stage by, all of these governments of various sorts that claim that they care about human rights, I've seen many, many more people lifting up BDS in the context of something that average everyday people can do to bring some level or raise the cost of this occupation for the Israelis. I don't like to assume anything in terms of who may be watching. So maybe the best place to start here, Olivia, is what is BDS, and talk a little bit about the BDS movement.
Yeah, like you were just saying, it's really great that there are so many people, celebrities, politicians, speaking out in solidarity across the country. But we actually need to move beyond just statements of solidarity and actually put our solidarity into action. And that is what BDS aims to do. So BDS, for those who don't know, stands for Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions. It is a call from Palestinian civil society. Palestinians got together in Palestine in 2005 to issue this call for the international community. The BDS call is modeled off of the South African anti-apartheid movement. And Palestinians are calling on us as the international community to boycott, divest from, and sanction Israel until Israel complies with international law by meeting 3 main demands. Number 1 is ending the occupation and dismantling the illegal apartheid wall. Number 2 is full equality for Palestinian citizens of Israel. And number 3 is the right of return for Palestinian refugees. So these are the demands of the BDS call. And I always say, for those of us who are familiar with the labor movement, you can think of it like a picket line. We would never cross a picket line if workers at a business were on strike until their demands were met. And you can think of BDS the same way.
BDS, Olivia, as I'm sure you know, has been under assault across the U.S. I'm not sure what the number of states is, but I believe in several states, there's actually legislation on the books that makes it that can financially penalize companies for supporting BDS. Also, there's in some states, like I know in Texas, there's been reports of like teachers having to sign statements promising that they won't engage in BDS. Can you talk a little bit about the kind of pressure that has been pushed against BDS by the Israel lobby across the U.S.?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, like you said, this is the biggest challenge we face in the BDS movement is the onslaught of repression and attacks from Israel and Israel's allies like the United States. Israel has this app that's known as Israel's Troll Army, where they give these actions to people who want to get people on blacklists and complain about certain things. They have these online actions where you can earn points to actually do this. There are attacks and blacklists on student organizers globally. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Canary Mission, the blacklist that targets student organizers. They've attempted to paint BDS as anti-Semitic and as this movement that you can't touch. I myself have had several articles written about me being smeared in the Times of Israel. I had my Twitter account suspended multiple times. So it's really commonplace for those of us in the movement. But I think we're also seeing a shift in how it's received. And I think that this kind of blacklisting doesn't really hurt people in the same way that it used to. In the US, for example, with the rise of Democratic Socialists of America that I'm a part of, we now have members of Congress who are no longer scared to say that they support BDS. Cori Bush, a DSA member that was attacked during her campaign for supporting BDS, her response was, yes, I've always been a supporter of BDS. And that's huge. And it's because people are seeing through these attacks for what they are, which is racist. And seeing that what Israel is doing to Palestinians is horrendous, and that BDS is a legitimate human rights-based movement, in a way that we can all take action. And that is a huge threat to Israel. Israel and its supporters are obviously, they can't just come out and say what they want to say, which is defending apartheid, defending occupation. So they resort to these bad faith attacks and these really draconian measures to try and muzzle Palestinian advocacy. But those measures are increasingly out of touch with public opinion, as we're seeing now. And I think it shows just how powerful and successful the movement has become. And that's why they're so afraid of it.
I think that's such an important point as well. And we continue to be joined here by Olivia Copy-Smith, who's an organizer with BDS and also DSA. I mean, we have seen some victories too. I mean, different entities and others who have divested different, I think it was the Trade Union Council of Britain last year was signing on to BDS. So, I mean, it feels that the momentum around this is growing in a big way. And certainly we saw that, honestly, in the struggle against apartheid in South Africa, that was a sign that a tipping point was coming, that the movement to sanction and divest and boycott South Africa became so huge worldwide. How are you connecting these two moments? I mean, the growth of a resistance, obviously, it's a long-going resistance, but perhaps a renewed resistance there all across Palestine, and also this growing movement of solidarity around the world.
Yeah, I think with all of the horrific news and images coming from Gaza and from all over Palestine, we see that things are changing like never before. The brutality that's happening right now is unprecedented, but the solidarity is also unprecedented. And, it should have never have been a controversial thing to say, I support Palestinian human rights, like I stand with Palestinians. That should have never been controversial. And now it seems that it no longer is controversial. I think that we also have seen during the pandemic just disgusting treatment by our government. We are giving $3.8 billion a year to Israel while we have a crumbling, disgustingly exploitative healthcare system, while we have a housing crisis, while we have people working multiple jobs or people who have been unemployed for the majority of this pandemic who can't make ends meet. There is so much need, and we could use that money for life right here in the United States rather than for death in Palestine. And I think that has become clear to more people.
I think that it's been amazing to see, really, just in the past week. I mean, this is an issue I've been working with in 2002. I mean, I always hate to say something is unprecedented because, what does that really mean? I'm not that old. But I mean, it does feel like this building resistance has a level of unprecedentedness to it. I think that for a lot of people looking at this moment and thinking, okay, how do we make sure that this doesn't go away? I mean, it feels to me like BDS is that thing that folks can and should grasp onto, because unfortunately we know that the newspapers, it's going to fade in the headlines, and that all these different things of like emergency live blogs and even us, coming on every day live is not going to be the everyday piece, and it can fade away. But it feels like BDS has the ability to keep this issue alive. I mean, in a lot of ways, but especially by just relating how in your everyday life, you can do something. It's not even like you have to go way out of your way.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I'll say about BDS, though, is that like so many other movements for justice, it's way more powerful to engage in collective action than individual action. So I often see these lists going around which have, hundreds of companies to boycott. And that's fine and good. I personally don't buy any Israeli products or products from companies that are complicit. But way more powerful and impactful than that is actually joining a collective action. So picking a target and winning a boycott or divestment at an institutional level or an organizational level. So in your union, in your faith community, at your university, at your city council level, holding our elected officials accountable with our tax dollars, that's going to be way more impactful than just taking action on your own. And I think people are really starting to get organized around this. There are lots of different BDS campaigns happening in the United States. There are campaigns against G4S. There's the Deadly Exchange campaign, which works to end the police exchanges between U.S. police forces and Israeli police and military. So there are tons of examples of BDS campaigns, and I think that it's our duty as taxpayers in the United States to make sure that our money isn't going to Israeli violence.
No, I think that's a well-taken point. I'm always surprised by how many, this pension fund and this, that, and this person. I mean, and I consider myself like a very pretty informed person on this issue, and I'm often surprised at how deep the tentacles go, Rania.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to also remind people, I mean, BDS sometimes, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign, which if you're tuning in, that's what we mean by BDS. Also, when resolutions get passed, I'm always surprised on campuses or when it comes to what pension funds are invested in. I'm always surprised by how it goes hand in hand with just the U.S. military industrial complex. Like you'll have these pension funds that are also invested in Raytheon or also invested in oil companies. And so one thing that I always found really inspirational about the BDS movement is how it has really been able to bring together various issues around the cause of like really divesting from the companies and corporations that are hurting not just Palestinians, but the environment and are hurting people in other countries because they also make weapons that hurt Yemenis or whatnot. So I do think it's, it always goes back to like, this is an important movement. It goes beyond Palestine in many ways because Israel is a part of, U.S. imperialism. It's a part of this kind of like, world where we have one side that is the Western imperialist capitalist countries that are oppressing the global South, and Israel's part of the winning side. So I think that's really important to bring up too, because I remember during my time when BDS was sort of a newer phenomenon, always learning more and more about how interconnected these issues are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, a common sort of cliche we like to use on the left is all of our struggles are interconnected. That's not just like spiritually, we're there for each other. It's materially connected. Right. And just an example, as one of our BDS targets is G4S, which was just recently acquired by Ally Universal. They have a horrific record of human rights abuses around the world, including in the United States, detaining and transporting undocumented immigrants. And they partially own and operate the Israeli National Police Academy. So all of these images that we're seeing out of Palestine right now, the news about the border police being moved to repress Palestinian protests, those police are trained at this police academy. That police academy also hosts these U.S. police exchanges. So when American police forces are going to Israel to train in these, racist tactics of surveillance and racial profiling, crowd control and counterterror, we know what that means. They're training at this police academy that is owned by G4S, the same G4S that, has security guards all around the United States, that has a record of human rights abuses globally. So it is all materially connected.
And one thing I'd want to ask is, I have to ask you this because I'm sure there'll be some troll who makes this point in the comment section. But it's also, the most common argument by Israel supporters against BDS is, like it's anti-Semitic. You're singling out the only Jewish state in the world with a boycott. It harkens back to like Nazi Germany's boycotts. So how do you respond to that, to those people who make that argument?
Yeah, BDS is a call from Palestinian civil society. Palestinians are being oppressed and occupied by Israel. So, of course, BDS campaigns target the Israeli state because of its responsibility for serious human rights violations of international law. The BDS movement does not campaign against individuals because they happen to be Israeli, not random Jewish businesses. BDS campaigns target the Israeli state. And I think people are starting to see through Israel's attempts to conflate criticisms of its human rights violations with anti-Semitism, and to conflate Zionism with Judaism. You know, Israel is a state, not a person, and everyone has the right to criticize the unjust actions of a state.
And
no, I think that's
people,
very true. No, go ahead, please.
I was just going to remind people again who are just now tuning in that when we say, because people do get a little confused about the acronym, BDS refers to the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions Campaign, a call by Palestinians to boycott, divest from, and sanction Israel until it complies with international law. Go ahead, Eugene.
No, I was just going to say it's one of the most absurd things. I saw someone on Twitter say that they would rather boycott ISIS and Boko Haram. I mean, now I don't know why you can't do all of those things at once. But I mean, Boko Haram is not selling goods in America. I mean, it's such an unbelievable non sequitur. But you can make that feeling, and I think this is the important point, Olivia, that I might want you to speak to. In many ways, the only reason you can make those kind of parallels is because of the absurd demonization that has happened to the Palestinian people over so many years, that you can just sort of say anything and compare the struggle for Palestinian liberation to Boko Haram. And, you know, you can, I don't know, I guess you can say anything on social media, but to me, it is deeply related to the smears and the demonization Palestinian people and their movement have had to face.
Yeah, I mean, it's racist. That's the bottom line, is that it's racist. You know, of course, Palestinians and those in solidarity with Palestinians are going to orient their struggle towards boycotting Israel. And yeah, the argument there is that BDS singles out Israel, but you know who singles out Israel is the United States. Israel is the largest recipient of foreign military aid, with the U.S. giving nearly $4 billion a year to the Israeli military. So it's not only our right to draw attention to that and to engage in direct action to protest that, but again, it's actually our obligation as residents and taxpayers in the U.S.
So for the person that is looking at this and says boycott, divestment, sanctions, that sounds good. I'm all about it. I'd like to find other people and link up who are also all about it. Where should they look?
Yeah, please visit bdsmovement.net. There are tons of campaign ideas and resources on there. There are actions you can take at every level, from the national level to your city, your union, your university. So hit up bdsmovement.net.
Right on. Well, Olivia Cotby-Smith, an organizer with the BDS movement, as well as DSA in Portland. Really, really appreciate you giving us some of your time today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
No, absolutely. Well, Rania, before we No, please go right ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to remind people that, you know, the reason that we are talking about boycott, divestment, and sanctions is just a reminder that Gaza is being carpet bombed right now. Civilians in Gaza are being targeted, and over 200 Palestinians have been killed in the last week of Israel's airstrikes on Gaza, including 61 children. People are still being pulled from under the rubble. I mean, you can see from the images that are displayed next to us. It's just horrific what's taking place. And so this is something that you can do. People keep asking, well, what do we do? How can we help? To boycott, divestment, and sanctions is one of the most important ways to help. It's a call that has come directly from Palestinians. Back onto you, Eugene. I just wanted to remind people of the death toll.
No. I think I think that's important to note. And obviously, there are 213, at least 213 people Palestinians who have been killed in Gaza. 61 of them children. At least 1,500 people have been wounded there. The Israelis have released the information that 12 people have been killed, 2 children and 300 wounded. So again, I mean, I want to just keep noting the level of disproportionality here, because I think, as we have seen, go ahead.
And Eugene, there's also the West Bank. I mean, I believe something like 19 Palestinians. I need to double check that number, but in the teens, over 10 Palestinians for sure have been killed in the West Bank. And that number seems incredibly small next to the number of people in Gaza that have been killed. But there's also an assault on Palestinians who are protesting in solidarity with the people of Gaza across the West Bank. And there's also extreme police brutality against Palestinians protesting inside 48 Palestine. Go ahead, Eugene.
No, yeah, I mean there certainly are. I mean, it really is in many ways. It's interesting to read the Israeli press in this context, but I do just want to note also quickly as we talk about this that as we were talking about, the Israeli bombardment is not only continuing, but they themselves said that they were going to intensify the bombing tonight. And Benny Gantz, a defense official there, top politician in Israel, said that no person area was safe. So I think that gives you a sense of what is going on here. We're going to turn the page here. We are going to go to Gaza, and we are very happy to be joined as we continue the show by Wafa Al-Udaini, a Gaza-based journalist and activist. Wafa, thank you so much for being with us. Oh, you might be muted. We're just going to see here. I don't know if it's on our end or your
audio issue here.
Yes, sir.
There we go.
Yeah. So thank you so much for having me.
No, the pleasure is really all ours. Go ahead, Rania.
I was going to say thank you so much for joining us. Can you give us an idea of, well, first of all, where are you and what is it like where you are at the moment?
Yeah, here I'm based in the Gaza Strip, and in particular in the middle area of the Gaza Strip. And really, I can the situation at the moment horrific. It's terrible here, and I can tell you that. Like I always say that what is happening on the ground is really genocide, because people are being killed like every year. Like breaking news that there are got bombed and the family are inside these houses. Some of them, as you said, they are pulled from under their apples. Like the condition situation at the moment, it's really terrible, and I can tell you that the Israeli occupation, the Gaza sky at all. Every single moment there is explosion. They just bombed residential buildings. They just bombed. Everything is moving. Cars, media offices, and many things. That has nothing to do. Like self-defense else, but they just make justification for their killing to the people in order to kill their spirit, in order to hate being Palestinians, them hate here in the Gaza.
Wafat, yes. I'm curious, were you in Gaza in 2014?
Yeah, sure. I've never left Gaza. Yeah.
Do you feel, oh, you've never left Gaza, which I guess is a part of the siege situation that doesn't allow people to leave or come back in. And that so many people in Gaza are in that same circumstance. But from what you remember from 2014, how do you compare what's happening now during this assault to 2014? Is it worse? And what about it is worse, if so?
Yeah. Actually, in 2014, it's really so deadly aggression on Gaza, and really it's so terrible. But I think that this aggression that is happening on the ground at the moment, like it's the most deadly.
I think Wafat may have just frozen. So as you can tell, I mean, we're talking to somebody who's in Gaza. It looks like, oh, there she is. She's back. Yes. Sorry, we lost you for a moment.
Yeah.
Wafat, you were explaining, let's try and hopefully we have a connection, which I imagine is being disturbed by the Israeli bombardments. But you were explaining the difference between 2014 versus the assault today on Gaza. Can you continue explaining that?
Yeah, sure. Like, that the 2014 aggression, so deadly aggression indeed, but I can tell you that this aggression is the deadliest indeed. It's really so horrific. Like I can say that it's really more horrible than what happened in 2014. Like, they are the Israeli they are just so I don't know, but they just kill the people, and discrimination between this building is for civilians and that building is institutions or anything. They just bombed everything, like they just want to prove that they are destroying Gaza, that they are just killing here. They just to show the world that, or show their people that we are ourselves by killing or by bombing these buildings. And I tell you, like maybe the people outside, they think that Gaza is like a country or something else, but right now Gaza is just a tiny area, and it's just 360 kilometers, and it's just we don't have airplanes, we don't have ports, and even we don't have shelters to protect us from the brutality. Like whenever, the people like in the who live near the separation Israel, they just evacuated their homes, because they feel that if they are just inside Gaza, they will be safer here. But like so many people got massacred just yesterday. Entire family, they just flee their homes while from the Russian fence area to inside Gaza city. They lived with their relatives, but the Israeli forces, they just bombed them in the house, and they killed the entire family, and I think one or two survived from this family. Yeah, so you can find that it's so many families actually get massacred. I can, like, it's really massacre, because it's really genocide what is happening. So
Wafat, I want to ask you, Wafat. Oh, sorry. Wafat, I want to ask you, because we want to, unfortunately, the audio is skipping a lot. So we want to try to make sure we can hear what you're saying. I want to ask you if you can turn off your camera so that we can try to get a better signal. And then for those who are watching, we are speaking to Gaza-based journalist Wafat Al-Udaini. She's covering the situation, obviously, in Gaza, is from Gaza. And also, as you can tell from the communication issue, I've done some interviews with journalists in Israel, and the connection is perfect. People in Gaza, this is intentional. This loss of connectivity is an attempt to try to cut Gazans off from being able to show the outside world what is happening in real time. So, Wafat, have you managed to figure out how to turn off your camera? Is it off? Oh, now I can't hear her at all.
We may have lost her. But I think that's a very important point that you're making. Yeah, it's just that
we've had trouble getting. I think a lot of media outlets have had a difficult time talking to people inside Gaza in real time, just conducting basic video interviews, so people in Gaza can tell the outside world what's happening to them and what's going on. And we have to remember, Israel bombed that building over the weekend that housed international media organizations. And, they used the excuse that Hamas was firing rockets. There's no evidence that Hamas was firing rockets nearby. Even if there was, it does not justify hitting a media building. That said, the purpose of
that. And I also just want to note here, I don't want to cut in. Not only is there no evidence, like Eugene Puryear and Rania Khalek are saying there's no evidence, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who no one can confuse as a supporter of the Palestinian people, he stated that he was not shown any evidence that led him to believe Hamas was operating out of that building. And the Israeli media, just before he made that statement, had been shopping this statement by the Israeli government that, we showed them smoking gun evidence that showed this is true. U.S. Secretary of State, again, not a friend of the Palestinian people, is saying clearly he never saw that evidence. The Associated Press president has said they've been in that building for 15 years. And he said they actively look for these type of things, to make sure that they know what's going on, that no one who's ever worked there has ever in any way claimed that. And I think, it's part of the broader piece. And we saw this, I hate to bring her name up, Rania, but we saw this, and Bari Weiss raised this over the weekend, that all media is controlled by, Hamas or whatever, and that there's, it's all the same, essentially, even the U.S. and international media. And this idea that, journalists of all types, Palestinians, international, whoever they may be, somehow are not actually reporting the truth, they're not actually reporting freely, I think is exactly the type of thing the Israeli government wants to get out there about these sorts of attacks. But again, U.S. Secretary of State, the Associated Press, Al Jazeera, there's actually no credible source other than the people who bombed the building, which means that they're not credible.
Right.
There's actually no credible source that Hamas is working out of that building. And as you said, that wouldn't really change the game. But I think it's important that on their own terms, it's not true.
Right. And I want to note too, this is something I'm always, so today I interviewed Amira Haas, who is an Israeli journalist for Haaretz, Israeli dissident, I should say, who I asked, we were having a conversation. I encourage people after the live stream to go watch this interview with Amira Haas. She had a lot of insight into how we got to this escalation in violence, what the root causes are and whatnot. But we were talking about this issue of, Hamas is everywhere in Gaza. And she made the point of, well, if Israel's going to use that excuse, you can actually look at Israel and with that same logic, justify bombing everything in Israel. She wasn't suggesting we do that, but she was just saying how ridiculous this logic is, because actually Hamas is the government in charge. And, there probably is maybe 1 degree of separation when the authorities in charge. There might be 1 degree of separation between this building and Hamas because they happen to be the authorities in charge, not because they're launching rockets from there. But she was like, if you look inside Israel, almost every single civilian home in Israel has a gun or a soldier in it because everybody has to serve in the army. Does that make all of their homes legitimate targets? All of Israel's military bases are embedded in major Israeli cities. Did that make Tel Aviv a legitimate target and every building surrounding this place where they're planning military operations a legitimate target? The same could even be said of the U.S. There's U.S. military bases all across the U.S. There's police and military everywhere. Would that make residential neighborhoods that happen to be right next to them legitimate targets? No, it wouldn't. This entire framework of, that building, that literally, this is what Israel will say to justify taking down an entire residential apartment building, is one of the apartments, a guy who's official in Hamas lives there. He's not firing rockets from there. He's not fighting from there. He's not even in the military wing. Hamas is also a political organization that is the administrator of the Gaza Strip because they were elected there. So you're telling me that somebody who maybe serves in some ministry unrelated to even military activity happens to live in this residential building. So you're going to say the entire building is a legitimate target? It's completely upside down and backwards and shouldn't even be taken seriously. And the fact that the international media even imply that, but Hamas isn't there, so why did they bomb it? Well, even if someone from Hamas was there, it doesn't make it a legitimate military target.
Right. Well, I think we have Wafa Al-Udaini, who is a journalist based in Gaza, back with us. Wafa, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, perfect.
Yes,
Thank
I can
you.
hear you.
Excellent. Well, fantastic. Thank you for sticking with us. We're just going to push through any technical difficulties. I know, Rania, you were in the middle of a question, I think, so I don't want to cut you off there.
Well, actually, I think Wafa was in the middle of explaining to us the difference between 2014 and now, but I guess we can move on from that. It clearly seems like a lot of Gazans agree that this time around is worse. So Wafa, I'm curious, what kinds of I guess give us an idea of, coronavirus is still an issue right now. Has everybody kind of forgotten about it because of the bombing, or are these two emergencies now taking place at the same time? We also hear that the road to the Al-Shifa hospital, the largest hospital in Gaza, was bombed on Sunday in what looks like an Israeli massacre of several missiles that hit residential houses along that road. So are people even able who need it to get to the hospital?
Yeah. As I told you before, that this war or this aggression, I don't like to say it war. It's not war because it's not war. It's really aggression on the people of Gaza. But this one is the deadliest in Gaza. That Gaza is under siege for over than 40 years so far. So every sector is under on the brink of collapse, including the health sector. So the hospitals are overwhelmed, and that we have COVID-19, and we have so many number over than 1,000 in a day. But at the moment, like everybody is forgetting or forget about coronavirus, forget about everything. Like the people, they just think of coronavirus and then they are just talking about the other virus, which is the patient. And like we don't have time actually to think of coronavirus because we don't have any solution. Like the people, they be beside each other, like like some people, like over than 4,000, over than 2,000 Palestinians right now, they are homeless, so they don't have any place to go. So they have to go to their relatives, to go to the UNRWA schools and this stuff. So you find so many crowds in these areas. So like they totally forget about it. But that the hospitals actually, we don't have so many hospitals here, and so many items are missing from the hospitals as well. So really, I'm sure that the doctors and the health staff, they are just struggling to treat the people and struggling to like to help the injured. Yeah, so and like the actually the Israeli occupation make things actually much worse when they bombed the streets, that led to the hospitals. They just bombed the streets that led to Shifa Hospital. Shifa Hospital is the main hospitals in Gaza and the biggest one. So like when there is like a serious case, they just transfer these cases to a Shifa hospital. So they bombed all the street or most of the streets that led to this hospital, that to hinder the working of the ambulances. And even there is another hospital in Beit Lahia, which is the Indonesia hospital. Also, they bombed the streets that led are sure that they mean to hinder the working of the ambulances and the health staff, the paramedics, I mean. So yeah, so situation here is getting worse every single moment. And when you come, like in the past, you can find so many beautiful things, like the buildings and everything is beautiful. But if you can just go where the middle of Gaza City, you can find just like so many massive destructions. All of the buildings that we have used to see that housed actually media offices are in these buildings, and most of the institutions and centers are in these buildings. So you can just find nothing now. You can just find the like machines and so many heartbreaking picture. Like it's really very bad looking to such thing. And the most like the saddest here is the people themselves. Like the some people. A girl. Her name is. She just spent. She is a survivor. She is the only survivor from her family. All of them got massacred, but she is the only survivor. She spent like over than 5 hours under rubbles until they pulled her from under rubbles, and she is now in the hospital to get a treatment. So like she is just 10 or 11 years old, and you can imagine that such a kid, how her future will be. Really, it's thinking of this thing, it's really hard to break in. And there is also a 5-month-old child. His name is Omar. Also, like his mother and all of her children, she went to her sister or her relative, and because of the destructive, so because of the she told them, she told her husband, I couldn't get out from the home, so I will sleep today in my relative home. He told her, okay, and inshallah you will be safe there. He thought that she was there in her relative's house, but like the Israeli warplanes, they bombed the house and killed her along with her children and killed their relatives, all of them, like two women, two mothers, and four of their children. Like the eight of each one of them has four children. So the eighth children got died, and the survivor is just the month-old kid whose name is Omar. And like looking at him, his dad, just was like looking at him, and he was crying, and like he felt really in much pain, and looking at him, and like it's really so ranking here. And and actually in every there's so many stories to be told. You can give me like the whole day. I can't like finish from telling you so many heartbreaking stories. And like also there is like two grooms. They are supposed to be their wedding party is supposed to be today, today, and they got murdered like just a few days ago. And you can imagine how is the family of their fiancés, and like this stuff. And other guy, she is also is about to she engaged, and she is supposed to be very soon, but she is a doctor in the university, but they bombed her family house, and she and along with other of her like her father and her other sisters, all of them got massacred during in their homes. So many stories actually to be told here, but I don't know. I don't have much time to tell you more. It's really, like there's pain here. And for the people of Gaza, they don't have any shelter. They don't have any place to go. I can tell you that, like some people, and also there's Rafah city. Like there is a woman. She bought so many things for her kids, because she said that I want you to be home. I don't want you to get out at all, because maybe there is any house. So the sharp lens of, or the shares of the rockets, maybe it will be tough. But like she just put them, just kept them inside the home, play with toys. But like sadly, the occupation warplanes bombed their house and killed the children. Of the children got killed, sadly. But like these are just very few.
We may have
lost
Wafa there, and I know she was saying she might have to go. Harrowing. I don't know what else you can say.
From
No. We hear you.
Like that the occupation caused for them this aggression. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the toll, Wafa, seems just so hard to comprehend for those of us who are outside of Gaza. And it seems that, I mean, there are obviously so many deaths and physical injuries, but just the psychological torture and the psychological impact must be massive.
Yeah, sure. And then, like there's, of course, so many massacres, so many get actually dramatized enough. That, like there's a little child, he is on, like, no, not just 3 or 4 years. Maybe I can send you of this guy, like he is just without moving, without talking anything, without like I think he got shocked of massive explosions, I guess. So like it's really so sad to such a kid, like is gonna spend all of his life this way, like without talking, without feeling anything, without contacting with the people. It's really very, very hard for his family. And I tell you for myself, like I have 3 children here, but it's really, like I just them whenever they hear the explosion. At the very beginning, I just tell them that they are just fireworks. It's fine. Okay, they are just celebrating Eid, and because we were supposed to celebrate Eid. But sadly, we heard like explosions instead of fireworks. So I just them that they are fireworks because they are just celebrating Eid. But like after that, they don't believe me, because it's really so scary, and even myself, like sometimes feel scared from these massive explosions. I maybe like any of them, I get we get bomb any time. For me, I just experienced 2014. I got my hair bombed during for 2014, and it's really a memory that I couldn't forget because it's really so bad and so sad. I was so really like I can't tell you that it's really so hard for everybody, like to have your house that you used to live for so many years. This means that I just lose it in just a few seconds. It's really so so hard for everybody to but like after looking to my house destroyed and all of the things, the memories, everything is level to the ground. It's really I felt that like I cried so hard, but after that like we it's our used to such thing, but we should keep moving in this life. We should situation. We should let them to let us let our spirit down. We should always think that like it's the vice of so we have to resist and we have to keep moving because the people of Palestine, like we do like to live in a peaceful life, do like to live in a decent life. We just keep going on in this life and and resist the occupation and our legal right to resist the occupation because they just kicked us out of our house in 1948. So it's really our right to get our to our homes.
Of course.
Yeah. So yeah.
Wafat,
So much. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We really, really appreciate you being willing to join us. Wafa Al-Udaini, who is a journalist based in Gaza. Thank you again for joining us and bringing us these perspectives. Rania, I'll just quickly say here, as we were talking, in fact, sadly, the death toll in Gaza has been updated. 217 now have been killed, and 63 children. So an increase there in the Gaza of Palestinians killed just right away there.
The way that she was describing the fear of having children in that situation and having to like explain to them or try to like, calm them down, that they're terrified. I mean, what a terrifying, Israel's indiscriminately bombing people. And for anybody to have to sit there and explain how scared they are for them and their family, this doesn't have to happen. This doesn't need to be happening right now. It's happening because Joe Biden is letting it happen. It's happening because America arms Israel with $3.8 billion a year. It's happening because the European Union supports Israel's so-called right to self-defense. Right. What we just heard was somebody describe aggression, not self-defense. It is disgusting. Yeah. It's absolutely disgusting and horrifying and does not need to happen. Children should not be terrorized like that. No children.
No, I mean, I think that, no, I mean, I agree with you 100%. I mean, I think that it's obviously, I mean, what do you even say? 217 people killed, 63 children. And when you compare that to the 12 people that Israel is reporting who have died, I mean, it's just an unbelievable, the fact that this even can be discussed in the mainstream media as if there's some form of equivalence. I mean, even when they're not trying to make exact equivalence, I mean, just to act as if, you know, there's any sort of sense of proportionality here and how this is playing out is just so sick on so many levels. Please go ahead.
I'm reminded very quickly of a story I saw being told earlier today about a father in Gaza who has children and his brother has children. And, you know, we've heard these horrifying nightmarish stories of parents having their children sleep on, you know, you sleep on this side of the house, you sleep on that side of the house. And that way, if it's bombed, at least someone survives. I mean, that alone. So this story was of a man in Gaza and his brother basically switching their children. Like, you take one of my kids, I'll take one of your kids. That way, if my house is bombed, at least one of my kids survives, and vice versa. Like, this shouldn't be a conversation that anybody should be having to have. Just completely outrageous and unnecessary, and all so Israel can mow the grass. I mean, it's just outrageous. Just a shout out to Muna Ali, who gave us something money in the super chat. Thank you for that. I want to remind people who are watching, if you do donate in the super chat, we will read out your name and give you a shout out. And it helps sustain and support our journalism and our ability to offer you this live coverage. That said, I believe we have another guest on, Eugene.
Yeah, I think we have Hadil Shatara from Sami Dune with us here. Hadil, thank you so much for being back with us on Breakthrough News.
Thank you so much for having me again.
Well, we really wanted to check in with you because obviously one of the big pieces of news that has captivated the world is the general strike that has happened in Palestine today. If you could just tell us about that general strike call and what the impact was today across Palestine.
Of course. So the general strike call was launched 2 days ago. Watching what's happening in Gaza and the continuous attack on the Sheikh Jarrah in Jerusalem, what's happening in Haifa, Al-Lid, and all over Palestine and in Hebron is not something that we as Palestinians should live with, and we have to stand against it. So all the youth groups in Palestine, in the historic Palestine, from the river to the sea, has launched this strike together. We sent a call to action and announced a strike, and the strike was today. It was one of the most successful strikes that ever happened. All Palestine, from the river to the sea, went into a strike today. People went out to the demonstrations in the street. A lot of confrontations has happened. So this strike sent one message, that people in Palestine want to be united, and Palestine is actually, yes, from the river to the sea. This is the message that this strike was sending.
And I'm glad you mentioned that there were large protests that also took place all across Palestine. And I know that certainly, many of the protesters were attacked by Israeli security forces. Talk about some of what happened today in that regard, if you could.
Almost all the demonstrations were attacked. In Ramallah, we have 3 marchers and around 60 people who got in, actually 77 people got injured in Ramallah. Even 33 people got injured. And if I'm going to continue giving the numbers, and in every single place, the demonstration was attacked by the Zionists with rubber bullets and with live bullets. They're using live bullets on people. And not only gas tears or rubber bullets, they're actually using live bullets in all the demonstrations. So they're trying to attack people, and they're actually trying to shoot the upper part of the bodies. So this is as well dangerous, and this is a motion that they're trying to send to the world. This is the violence that they use against people here. All the demonstrations were fully attacked in Haifa, in Al-Nasra, in Yafa. In Yafa, it was attacked really, really badly. In Ramallah, it was really dangerous at some point, as well as in Hebron. They actually have 1 martyr in Hebron, and now the demonstrations are still at this moment. In Nablus, in Jenin, and in many other places around Palestine, in Qalandia, Hawara, the demonstrations are still on and the confrontations are still on.
It seems to me that the popular resistance in the West Bank in particular is dramatically increasing as the Israeli aggression continues all around Palestine, of course. And it's been very notable to see, I think, reading the Israeli press, they seem very surprised that Palestinians are rising and rising more strongly. But talk about that if you could, because it has been very interesting.
Because if you look at what's happening in Palestine, the least thing we can do in the West Bank is to participate, and because all means of resistance are ours to use, and this is our right to use them to defend ourselves and to defend our lives. Yes, the popular resistance in the West Bank is an effective tool that can be used. Since the situation in the West Bank is different than the situation in Gaza, where the resistance is getting stronger every single day. And today was a message that we're trying to send as well, that we are behind the resistance with all tools and all means. We shouldn't be surprised. The oppression that people are facing in the West Bank, the attacks of the settlers are increasing. The checkpoints that they're creating in every corner of the world will lead to this. Because people are oppressed heavily. We're living in a ghetto society in the West Bank, as well in the 48 lands. So this would definitely lead that all people would revolt. And this is an important tool against them.
No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. I just want to remind our viewers that you are watching Hadil Shatara. She's an activist and organizer with the Samidun Network around prisoner rights and participated in helping to organize a general strike today. Hadil, I think that this is pretty unprecedented moment, because for the first time in a long time, it feels as though, or it seems as though, the Palestinians in the West Bank are uniting around and almost like organizing with Palestinians who are inside 48 Palestine, inside what people call Israel. Is that unprecedented to you, as somebody who's been active and organizing in the West Bank, having this kind of uprising happening in tandem with people inside 48 Palestine?
Actually, for the past few years, the connections between the people who are living in the 48 lands and the people living in the West Bank has increased massively. Organizing together for the past few years has been on the ground. We have organized a lot of activities together, especially for women rights, and during the Nakba Day, this has been happening for a while. So it was easy for us to organize this time, because the connections for the past few years, the youth has made these connections. What's important to see on this strike, especially, that this was led entirely by youth. It wasn't led by political parties. It was led by youth organization, youth movements around Palestine, whether it was here or in the 48 lanes. So seeing this and looking at it this way, this means that yes, we are reaching a more organized place as youth. We are working on the ground together, and it's easy for us to organize today and to be connected and to get connected. And if you look at it, we're under the same oppression, using different forms, but we're still living under the same oppression.
Yeah, I mean, we see in the last week, this kind of settlers, the religious extremist settlers that you have to deal with in the West Bank, are now also inside of 48 Palestine, attacking Palestinian citizens of Israel, who Israel often tries to say, oh, look, we are a democracy. We have all these Palestinian citizens, when in fact, a lot of what's being done to Palestinians inside the West Bank, putting Palestinians like you into these ghettos, these enclaves, surrounding you with settlements, is actually also happening to Palestinians who happen to also be citizens of Israel. It really is like an all-out assault. It's exciting to see the organizing taking place across these lines. But then at the same time, do you think there's also something frightening happening on the Israeli side? Does it feel more violent? Does it feel more extreme than before? What's your perception of the violence coming from Israel?
What my perception is that they are feeling trapped. And because they're feeling trapped, the real image is coming out to the world. Because people are resisting and people are out in the streets fighting this. And the real settlers, we're finally calling the people who are living in the occupied 48 lands settlers. They are settlers. So the names are coming back again. This is the behavior that they've been doing. But now it's all public, all in the streets. So the lie of their democracy is now out there. And yes, this is very important to us. The violence they're using this time, yes, it's increasing. They're not trying to use as much violence in the West Bank because they know if they flame the West Bank, then definitely things won't be easy in the coming few months. So what they're trying to do now is turn off the flame that they started. They don't know how. They're trying to isolate the cities and the towns in the 48 lands where the Palestinians live. They're closing the entrance of all the towns in the 48 lands, yes, with huge rocks and like they're doing to Sheikh Jarrah. They're isolating the Sheikh Jarrah. And that's what they're doing here in the West Bank. They're trying to isolate all the areas. But people are still working together and we're turning every single place into a confrontation place. These settlers are armed, but still, people are not scared anymore. People have reached a point where we have to fight for our lives. We have to get out to the streets.
What do you think changed? I mean, I know it didn't happen overnight. I know there's been a lot of organizing being done that maybe we in the US and in the West don't see all the time on a daily basis. It's happening. But what do you attribute to this sort of unprecedented rise of people? I mean, is it just so much happening at once between Al-Aqsa Mosque, between Sheikh Jarrah, between Gaza being bombed? What is it this time around that has caused such an outpouring of solidarity?
If you look at it politically, at the whole situation, you would see that the right wing is more violent and it's increasing. And their government is comes from a right wing. It's a right wing government. Their attacks as government has been increasing towards the Palestinians. They're arresting people. They're attacking people every single day. They're allowing the settlers to attack more. So people are reaching the point where we have to confront this. If we continue this, then we can't stand anymore. And if you look at what's happening in Palestine itself, if you look at the the Palestinian Authority is not defending people anymore. They're people alone. So there are no leadership in the streets to protect the people anymore. Whether it's here, 48 lands, Gaza has a bit different situation, but people are left alone. And because people are feeling that way, there are uprisings. And this is important because now all of us are reporters as Palestinians, as popular. So the world knows what's really happening because the real image are finally getting out to the whole world, and this is important. And this wasn't the case before. People would hear the occupation propaganda, and that's it. They wouldn't listen to the other side, to what's happening. We wouldn't be able to listen to Wafa, like moments ago, she was talking about what's really happening in Gaza. But today, the whole world knows what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Sheikh Jarrah, what's happening in Hebron. They actually called a guy to leave his car yesterday and told him to come to the checkpoint. They shot him dead in the street. He didn't die at the beginning. They left him to bleed for an hour and a half until he died, and then they called an ambulance. They closed around and they couldn't let people get to him. They watched him dying. This is the violence that we're dealing with as Palestinians. And this has been the case, but now it's out there and to the whole world to see. So this has made them more scared. They don't know how to act out or to react. whether in front of the international world or in front of their own people. So, but of course, if you look at the governments, the regimes, again, like the US government, the EU, the European Union, and the West governments are as also still protecting what's happening. And they claim that it's Israel is defending itself. What defending yourself is? Stealing other people land. So this is the case. The people are with the Palestinians. If you look at the demonstration around, whether it's in the Arab world or abroad, but in the diaspora, but still the governments are supporting and protecting what's so-called Israel.
Well, I'm curious, since you brought that up, what obviously the struggle there in Palestine is not only people are in solidarity, but I think very inspired. What is the response there in Palestine when people are seeing these protests gathering around the world, in America and Europe, really everywhere?
One reason that all people are in the streets now in Palestine is also due to the strong solidarity movement around the world. When we look at huge demonstrations in the US, like the demonstration in Michigan, for example, if you look at what happened in New York, Berlin, Paris, Athens, and everywhere, when we look at these demonstrations and we know that there are a lot of people who are supporting our struggle, that would actually make us stronger. A lot of people here are getting out to the streets saying, yes, the international world is being affected. Told the real story. We need to defend ourselves. So it has a very, very, very strong effect on people here. And it's important. We are not used to this. We're not people demonstrating with these numbers for Palestine. When you look at the people who are facing the war now in Yemen by Saudi Arabia government and UAE, who are getting out to the streets for Palestine, that makes us actually see collaboration even more.
I mean, I think that's so important to hear. And I think for those in the United States, it's the exact type of relationship of how both sides of a worldwide struggle can really, or all sides, lift each other up. And I think that is a crucially important piece. One thing before we let you go here, Hadil, is, for those who are watching, and again, we're talking to Hadil Shatara from Sami Dun, what do you most want people who are seeing this in countries like the United States? What are Palestinians calling on people to do in this moment?
Actually, our message is very simple and very clear. What Palestinian wants is their liberation. We want our liberation, the right to return for all the refugees. And we look at our case as a joint struggle cause. We are connected with people fighting in South Africa. We're connected with people who are fighting against racism in the US. Our fights are connected, and we cannot defeat Zionism, imperialism, and colonialism unless we all work together, unless our struggles are joined together. So this is our message today.
Thank you so much, Hadil. Again, Hadil Shatara from Sami Dun, the Palestinian Political Prisoners Network. Thank you for giving us more of your time here on Breakthrough News.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you all.
Of course. Pleasure is all ours. And Rania, I have to say, in the context of everything that is going on, very powerful to hear that people in Palestine are seeing the protest and it's giving them hope. I think one thing, our colleague Kay Pritzker was mentioning this to me the other day, that, some of his friends were saying, and not in a bad way, but like just in wondering, seeing what he's posting, that what's the point of a protest? Why do we protest? What do we go out? Which I think is a basic question, an important one. Mm-hmm. And he gave a great answer about the importance of building the Palestine Solidarity Movement, the importance of building and coming together and showing people that they're not alone, and many other fantastic things. And I think this is just an important addition to that kind of commentary about why it does matter to stand up and show solidarity in situations like this, because it's so easy to feel alone. As Hadil noted, they do whatever they can to try to isolate the Palestinian people, to prevent them from standing up for themselves, standing up for their own rights. And I can't really imagine, to be honest with you, that feeling, but I can have some sense, as a Black person in America who's been participating in the Black liberation movement, since I was 16 years old, that it is a powerful feeling to see people who are not from your quote unquote community, not from where you're from, stand up in a really powerful way about injustice that's being done to you. And I think that's just a powerful message from Hadil about what's happening, not just in Palestine, but really the global resistance here to this Israeli aggression that we're seeing there in Gaza, of course, where it's ongoing, in the West Bank, and inside of, as what some people would say, inside of Israel, and what others would say inside of 48 Palestine. Some would say inside the Green Line. But really just an important, set of parallels there.
Yeah, and I think it was really important that she mentioned that it's not like this one struggle is by itself, in the sense of it doesn't, Palestine, what happens in Palestine doesn't stay in Palestine. We know Israel is an arm of American imperialism in the Middle East and many ways around the world. So this is a fight not just against this localized issue of Israel and Palestine. It's a fight against colonialism. It's a fight against racism. It's a fight against imperialism. So I really appreciate that she made that point, because oftentimes that's lost on people. We have to remember, Palestine is a laboratory in so many ways. Israel has this access to this population that's largely defenseless and has no rights. And they can, they have to come up with these really sophisticated methods of domination and control. And that's why Israel has, that's why they call it the startup nation. They have all these startups and this military technology industry that comes up with ways to surveil people and control people and checkpoint infrastructure and border infrastructure. And that's why there's so many Israeli companies that get contracts at the US-Mexico border, like Elbit Systems, because they build these surveillance towers in Palestine that they can go tell the world, then sell to the world as tested, but battle tested, combat proven. The same goes for Israeli drones, which have been sold to dozens and dozens of countries around the world with that sort of stamp of approval of battle tested and combat proven. That just means it's been tested on Palestinians. So there's a whole industry around this. There's a lot of countries that benefit from the sort of experimenting, if you will, that Israel's able to do on Gaza and on the West Bank with Palestinians as their guinea pigs. So this is about more than just Palestine. I think that's always really, really important to recognize. And Eugene, I also just want to mention something I mentioned at the beginning, but I don't think, everybody who's viewing now, who's watching right now, probably
I think this is important about Gaza, please.
Right. But I think that it's really important to contextualize this in a broader sense of why this keeps happening to Gaza. A lot of people are trying to learn and understand, kind of like new on this issue. Why does Israel keep doing this to Gaza? You hear the word settler colonialism thrown out, and that's in a very real sense. Israel's creation in 1948, its foundation was based on the ethnic cleansing of 750,000 Palestinians who were pushed out of their homes. There was massacres and there was terrorism by the leaders of Israel at the time, who did this in a premeditated assault to clear the land to make a Jewish state. And in order to continue to have this Jewish nationalist state in this area of the world that has so many non-Jews in it, you have to continue to subjugate and oppress and dominate and control the indigenous population and continue to push them off their land, create more settlements, push them into these ghettos and these smaller and smaller enclaves. And that's part of what we're witnessing right now. Gaza is the most extreme version of that. 80% of the population in Gaza are refugees or the descendants of refugees, of Palestinians who were kicked out of their homes in 1948 at Israel's founding. The vast majority of people in Gaza are not originally from there. In some cases, they are from the cities that Jewish Israelis now live in over the border that are being pelted with homemade rockets. So this is an indigenous population that has been ethnically cleansed and that's fighting for its survival. And it's been under an air, land, and sea blockade, essentially a medieval siege for the last 15 years. And that is intentional. The way that Gaza is treated as this open air prison is an intentional policy of the Israelis. And what I wanted to go back to, which is what we opened with, was the man who is responsible, the architect of this isolation siege policy on Gaza. His name is Arnon Sofer. He's an Israeli demographer at Haifa University. And this is from an article that was written in Counterpunch, but this is not the first time this was reported. This was based on this guy's own words in a Jerusalem Post interview from 2004. So it says, I'm reading directly from this Counterpunch article. The demographer Arnon Sofer of Haifa University is the architect of the current isolation of Gaza. In 2004, he advised the government of Ariel Sharon to withdraw Israeli forces from within Gaza, seal the territory off from the outside world, and simply shoot anyone who tries to break out. Quote, when 2.5 million people live in a closed-off Gaza, it's going to be a human catastrophe, Sofer told an interviewer in the Jerusalem Post. Those people, he said, will become even bigger animals than they are today with the aid of an insane fundamentalist Islam. The pressure at the border will be awful. It's going to be a terrible war. So if we want to remain alive, we have to kill and kill and kill all day, every day. He added that, quote, the only thing that concerns me is how to ensure that the boys and men who are going to have to do the killing will be able to return home to their families and be normal human beings. So that's a direct quote from the man who architected the siege on Gaza, the isolation of Gaza back in the early 2000s. To kill and kill and kill are his words. And that is what Israel did in 2008, 2009. That is what Israel did in Operation Protective Edge in 2014 when they killed 2,200 Palestinians in the course of 51 days, over 500 of whom were children. And that is what they are doing now in 2021, when they have killed over 200 Palestinians, including at least 61 children. This is an intentional attack, intentional warfare against a civilian population that does not have an army, does not have a navy, does not have an air force, and is surrounded by Israeli gunboats, Israeli snipers, and Israeli F-16s. It's really important to keep that in mind.
I think it is really important to keep that in mind, and we will use that as a point to bring it to a close. But before we leave, just a final update in Gaza, where there are ongoing intensified strikes. And I want to continue to stress that the Israeli military was saying all day, this is happening now in Gaza, but all day there, that they were going to intensify the level of the bombing. Benny Gantz, who is the defense minister now? I don't know. He's some top politician, said that no one is safe anywhere in the Gaza Strip. 217 Palestinians have been killed.
He actually said that?
He did actually say that.
Said
He actually said he was touring some military installation. And Nancy Von Tour, hopefully I said that correctly, for your donation. Thank you, Nancy. We really appreciate that in a big way. And we thank you for thanking us for our work. We really thank you, Nancy, for that donation. But yeah, I mean, this is the mentality, is they're actually increasing aggressively the bombing that happened there. And, you know, the reality is that we're seeing the death toll continue to increase there in Gaza. 217 Palestinians have been killed, 63 children, at least in both of those numbers. At least 1,500 Palestinians in the Gaza Strip are wounded. There have been 12 Israelis killed, 2 of them children, 300 wounded. So you can see the massive disproportionality in the number of Palestinians being killed and wounded. Also in the West Bank today, the tolls are going up, but it seems upwards of 70 individuals were injured in some way by Israeli security forces during protests that were connected to a general strike that pretty much completely shut down the West Bank had serious economic disruption inside of Israel, particularly in the transportation sector, and was also, by the way, observed in Gaza. Obviously, it's a very different situation, but even some places that would have been trying to operate, showing solidarity and being a part of that strike as well, that also continued to move forward. And the size and the number of protests in the West Bank today notably grew. This is something that Israeli media is talking quite a bit about, the growth of protests there in the West Bank. And inside of what many call 48 Palestine, what others would say inside of Israel, not only was the general strike recognized, also large protests that took place and an ongoing both resistance to sort of pogrom-style attacks and also Palestinians really just standing for their rights in an area where they're allegedly citizens, but I think second class is even the way to say it, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh class citizens, and they're standing up for their rights there as well. So there are a significant number of actions taking place all across Palestine. Really, resistance in every possible way, it seems, is taking place by Palestinian people against one of the world's best funded, best equipped military machines. And unfortunately, there is no clear end in sight. The United States continues to protect Israel, as does the European Union. There are many conversations allegedly about peace talks between this person and that person, but really from the Israeli government, the only message has been that they are going to continue to fight. They're going to continue their airstrikes. They claim that they have many, many hundreds more sites and will continue to push forward their aggressive policies from the air, which have also been accompanied by artillery fire from both naval ships and land-based artillery. So that is where we are in the conflict. It will, death tolls will continue to grow, Rania, but a tragic situation, but also one where I think many people around the world have seen this resistance and find it to be at least a hopeful point, even amidst the terrible carnage.
Yeah, meanwhile, you have Joe Biden, after approving a $735 million weapons sale to Israel, as we talked about earlier, after a week of 3 times blocking a UN Security Council statement, not even a resolution, just a statement calling for a ceasefire, is now expressing that he'd like to see a ceasefire. Whether he'll actually put any teeth in that, given the rhetoric of the Israelis, it doesn't seem like the U.S. is backing that up with anything other than just rhetoric because they feel like they look stupid right now, which they do. But, you know. Yeah.
Well, big protest in Dearborn met Joe Biden today when he traveled to Dearborn. It's in the Detroit area, for those who don't know, for, I believe it was an infrastructure-related piece. So, we shall see. Obviously, there's a $735 million weapons deal that yesterday was approved by the Biden administration. Some talk in Congress about trying to find a way to hold up that deal. They actually don't really have the ability to hold up that deal at this point. So there is some talk about whether or not there may be a push in Congress to stop this or try to ask the Biden administration to stop this. There are reports that the Biden administration told, and that Biden himself told Prime Minister Netanyahu, that he is not able to hold back for much longer the tide of opposition to the U.S. doing nothing. So we'll have to see here over the next days how it continues to develop. If you are watching us here on YouTube or somewhere else, feel free to go to youtube.com/breakthrough news. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and also hit the bell so you can get alerts. We're going to continue, as it continues to be a flashpoint. We are going to try to continue our rolling coverage of what's going on and continuing to bring you voices from around the world and also on the ground in Palestine here on Breakthrough News. So if you're watching on YouTube, and if you can migrate to YouTube, make sure that you subscribe to our channel, also hit the bell and get alerts. Rania, as always, even in such terrible circumstances, very pleased to be here alongside of you. Very pleased to be a part of the Breakthrough News team, and shout out to all of our team members who help make this possible. And we will continue to move forward here on Breakthrough News, covering what's important.